So Megan mentioned in her opening presentation that one of the things that Deploy 360 is attempting to do is providing a bridge between the IETF standards making process and the sort of real world deployment type of activities. But one of the things we also like to do, partly as part of the Deploy 360 program, but also as in our Internet Society's role as the organizational host of the IETF, is actually to explain a little bit about the IETF and how you can get involved in that process. I think we're still waiting for the slides to come up, but while I'm waiting for that, I mean, there's two important points to make. Is that first point is that no one really is speaking for the IETF. All the comments that I have here are as an individual participant, and that's the same for everybody that's involved in the IETF. Okay, so what is the IETF? Well, I guess a lot of you would probably know, but actually it's quite surprising when we go to some of these events how many people actually aren't that familiar with the IETF. The IETF is there to produce the high quality relevant technical documents that are essentially the underpinning of the internet standardization process. And it's a process whereby essentially designing a design process for designing and managing the internet. It started in 1986, and it's this large international community of engineers, operators, and vendors and researchers who have a common interest in developing and operating the internet. I already mentioned that it's primarily volunteers who are participating on an individual basis to develop and refine the protocols that are making the internet working. In many cases, these volunteers will be sponsored or paid by their employers, but they participate in the IETF as volunteers. And the outcome of the IETF process is a production of documents known as RFCs, requests for comments, and it goes through a number of processes to reach that stage. So I mentioned that the IETF standards are what make the internet work. I would point out at this point, we can argue the semantics about whether they're standards or not. There is a technical definition within the IETF of whether something is a standard or not. But for the purpose of this, these are the recommendations and the protocols that the internet uses. So I know I'm probably going to get picked up on that at the end of this talk if I didn't mention that now. Okay, so some of the most common, well-known protocols that produced by the IETF is TCP/IP, of course, IPv4, TCP, UDP, IPv6, ones you'd have heard of. With respect to email, SMTP is well known, IMAP is well known. Then, of course, in the routing area, you've got the exterior gateway protocols such as BGP, the interior gateway protocols, OSPF is an example. Then you have the DNS, various DNS RFCs. That would be an area that would be quite familiar to most people using the internet, but also under the DNS side of things you have... Oh, sure. Okay, that's better. So then you have, under DNS, you've got also the DNSSEC and DANE. You have the web protocols, HTTP, and then in the sort of security area, TLS, which supersedes SSL, which is used for web-based encryption amongst other usages. So with the IETF, well, it's an open process. Anybody can participate in. It's often based around participation on the mailing list. That's the main sort of form of discussion. And anybody can submit a draft document known as an internet draft or ID. These get discussed by the various working groups who discuss the various merits, whether these should proceed forward to an RFC or whether they should be dropped. So there is a timeout process on internet drafts. But the ones that there's some consensus on, these will eventually progress to become RFCs. So there's, I already mentioned that there were the IETF processes divided up into working groups and areas. At the last count, there were 134 different working groups, and these usually have 2 or 3 co-chairs. And these are defined to have a specific time frame and a specific purpose. They're usually defined to have deliverables. But they're essentially, the working groups are created and chartered when there's sort of a problem occurs and there's something that needs to be solved. So they're intended to be time limited. They conclude their work, and then either an RFC comes out of it or the work eventually lapses. Although in some cases there are, of course, some working groups that are very, very long running if the work is considered to be ongoing and there's still things to do, like IPv6 MAN, for example. But these activities, these working groups are themselves organised into 7 different areas, and these are led by 2 or 3 area directors, each of those areas. These are the 7 IETF areas, so there's applications and real-time protocols, transport, which is related to data transport, congestion control. There's the routing area that deals with routing and signaling protocols. The general internet area, that's IPv4, IPv6, DNS, DHCP, so dynamic addressing. Network management operations, that's dealing with how are these protocols applied in the real world. Security, that's related to cryptography mechanisms and that type of area. So TLS, for example, would fall under there. And then there's a general area which is deals more with the how the IETF functions itself. So sort of by area, it's quite variable in how many working groups there are per area. The general area has precisely 1, but it's pretty. That sort of gives you an idea of where the sort of activities are within the IETF. So the IETF meetings, these are held 3 times per year. They move around the world to different locations. Obviously, in between the meetings, there's lots of discussions on the mailing lists. But the IETF meetings is an opportunity for people to come together and to discuss the work that's ongoing. So the last one was held in March in Chicago. There were well over 1,600 participants, and that's just on site. There were also quite a few remote participants as well. And they were drawn from over 50 countries. But I think the important point to make here is they were actually just 3 from Costa Rica when I looked on the attendee list. So it's quite a sort of small representation from this country. They also have they hold a hackathon, which is usually held before the actual IETF proper itself. I think it's usually the couple of days before. And this is held to help encourage the developers to come together and actually do collaboration and test code and look at the practical implementations of some of the IETF work. In our role as the sort of organizational host of the IETF, we provide a lot of coverage in terms of blogs and news items, which you can read about on our website. The next meeting will be actually in a couple of weeks in Prague in the Czech Republic. I think it's sort of important to point out there is remote participation available. There's audio streaming, there's web conferencing, there's also Jabber as well. So just to highlight that's happening. But to get involved, so I already mentioned that there were just 3 participants from Costa Rica. So the Internet Society does run an IETF fellowship. So these are available to help people attend the IETF meetings. So if this is something that you're interested in, you can have a look at the rather inconvenient link there. It's probably not very memorable, but these slides are going to be made available, so you can go back and look at it later. We also have an IETF policy program. So these are actually fellowships available more for regulators to attend IETF meetings. So to try to sort of bridge this gap between policymakers and regulators in government bodies to come and learn about what the IETF is doing and how it works, and to have a sort of better understanding of that process. Again, this very inconvenient link, but the slides will be made available later. Okay, so one of the key points that we're dealing with in Deploy 360 is IPv6 deployment. And this is something that's becoming, is very now common across most of the working groups at the IETF. It's a sort of key core part of the IETF process now. But just to pick out some key groups that are worth following, there's the IPv6 operations working group, which is about providing operational guidance on deploying IPv6 in new networks. Already mentioned the IPv6 maintenance group. So this is really keeping the upkeep and advancement of IPv6 protocol specifications and addressing going. One of the newer working groups is the home networking working group. So this is networking protocols for small residential networks, and this has been quite an active and popular working group. And then perhaps one of the more interesting and perhaps controversial groups is the sunsetting IPv4. So this is discussing how to transition from IPv4 to IPv6 with a view to eventually deprecating IPv4. Occasionally you get proposals cropping up in that to shut down IPv4 or to make it a historic standard or something, and it usually gets a lot of interest because of that. It hasn't happened yet, but I don't know, maybe in some point in the future that might change. Another area that we focus on in Deploy 360 is DNSSEC, and there are 3 working groups to mention here. The DNS Ops working group, this is dealing with sort of the operational aspects of DNS in general, but obviously DNSSEC is part of that and quite an important part of that activity. You've also got the Dane working group. So this is essentially work that's looking to link, for example, digital certificates to the DNS using DNSSEC. So this provides essentially a cryptographically verifiable trust anchor for digital certificates. So it's sort of aiming to solve solve the problem of third-party trust anchors in PKI systems. And so it's something that we've been promoting quite a lot in Deploy 360. It's kind of got limited deployment at the moment around the world, but we're quite sort of interested in this work. And then there's DPRIVE working group. So this isn't this isn't DNSSEC related as such, but this is providing encrypted DNS transactions over TLS and DTLS. So at the moment, DNS queries are unencrypted. You make a query and you get the response. These are sort of wide open to eavesdropping, and the aim behind dprive is to introduce some encrypted mechanism to reduce the eavesdropping possibilities. Okay, and in another area is routing that we have some involvement with. We haven't been doing so much of that in the last couple of years, but it's something that's coming back onto the agenda again. So this is in the areas of improving the security of the routing infrastructure, and I'm going to mention a little bit about this in the manners presentation. But for example, the CIDR working group is dealing. Well, I think this is actually very close to being closed now, this working group, so I think its work is concluded, or very close to concluded. I may stand to be corrected on that, but that's dealing with RPKA and BGP SEC specifications. And then you've got a newer working group, I think was formed a year or two ago, the CIDR Ops group. So that's really taking the CIDR specifications and working out how this can be deployed in new and existing networks. More generally, there's the Global Routing Operations Working Group that sort of looking at the operational problems that you have with IPv4 and IPv6 routing. And then there's also the Interdomain Routing Working Group, which is sort of dealing with the scalability of the BGP routing mechanism. On the sort of trust and identity and privacy activities, there's a number of working groups. I won't go into all of these in great detail. There's a TLS working group, so that's the cryptographic protocol for securing communications between different computer applications. The UTA working group is working more on how this TLS can be deployed in applications and on clients and servers. Quite an interesting working group with ZACME. So this is based on automated digital certificate issuing, and that was the basis for the Let's Encrypt service, although not specifically, it's not specifically about Let's Encrypt, but Let's Encrypt is based on that. And then there's other groups related more to the issues of cryptographic protocols. Okay, so in summary, the aim of the IETF is to make the internet work better, and it has a fundamental role in how the internet works. It's very much has very much international scope. The internet is a global entity, but it has, like with everything, there's local relevance to wherever internet-based networks are deployed. Basically, your participation is critical to its success, and we would encourage people to be involved in this process. Some more information is available there, which is a much better looking URL than the previous ones, and that was my last slide. So thank you.